Hello, and welcome to our Redefining Autism Awareness webinar. I'm Amy Cook, BCBA and Community Manager at Rasmus. We're thrilled to have you here today. What better way to kick off Autism Awareness Month and recognize World Autism Awareness Day than by coming together to share knowledge and insights? Thank you all so much for being here today. Before I hand it over to our fabulous guest speaker, I want to share a little bit more about Rasmus. Rasmus is an ABA clinical software company that was inspired by our founder's son, Rasmus, who was diagnosed with autism early on in his life. Our goal is to help deliver the highest quality behavioral therapy services to 1 million children with autism by helping the people who help them: behavior analysts, techs, teachers, parents, clinical directors, and all of you that are here today. So we provide the best clinical platform so you can keep the focus on the child in front of you. I'm now going to hand it over to our guest speaker, Armando Bernal. Thank you so much for being here today, Armando. So
Yeah,
excited for
yeah.
this talk.
Thank you so much for having me. Let me go ahead and share my screen here so everyone's able to see the presentation. So I'll go into a little bit of an introduction with me first. But for now, the title that we're going to be discussing today is Redefining Autism, some insights from within, and more specifically, discussing autism, ABA, from a more autistic perspective, and more specifically mine. And when we discuss these things, right, I want us to get some kind of representation on why I feel like I'm able to discuss that autistic perspective. I was diagnosed with autism at age 3. Doctors told my mother that I might as well learn sign language because I was never going to be able to speak. And if that's the case, I wouldn't be here today presenting to each one of you amazing people. The QR code on the top left, if you take a picture of that, will take you to our website at Autism International Consulting. And a little bit of a background for me is that while I was able to learn how to speak, I eventually became, through the support of my mother, my sister, my father, became a special education teacher within a school district in Houston, Texas, which is where I reside. And for those that may be familiar with Houston, I currently live in North Houston, that Spring Woodlands, Texas area. But as becoming a special education teacher, a lot of the times there, I was talking to parents, and they would say things to me like, my child's life is over before it began. With autism, they're not going to be able to have a life, that it's more like a cancer, that all these hopes and dreams that I had for their child just were not going to happen. And I felt in my current role that there had to be more that I could do with individuals on the spectrum. And so eventually I became a board certified behavior analyst, where I was able to help out in a more specific range with individuals on the spectrum, but I still felt I needed to do a little bit more. And then came along a couple of years ago, COVID. And so there was really not a lot I was able to do other than create a podcast. But I feel like a lot of people in 2020 became podcast hosts at that time. I created a podcast called A Different Path, where I was able to interview individuals on the spectrum throughout the nation and sometimes throughout the world with their specific hyperfixations, their hobbies, their careers, whether it was photography, being an Elvis impersonator, becoming a TikTok star. Many of these things were spoken about in my podcast. But as I continue forward from there, I wanted to do more and more to better support these individuals. And so I realized that I could become more of a special education advocate, working with individuals on the spectrum that were in the school districts, working on their IEP advocacy, working on their ability to receive the accommodations and modifications that they rightfully deserved. And that led me to eventually be doing things like this, becoming a speaker for amazing organizations such as Rasmus, but also internationally, working with corporations, working with companies that work with individuals on the spectrum in places like Dubai, in places like the UK, Ireland, South Africa, Pakistan, being able to work with families that were in need of this kind of support that just did not have the resources otherwise, right? And so being able to do that, and finally just becoming now what is the owner of Autism International Consulting. And we are currently the only autistic-owned ABA company in Houston, Texas, and one of two in the entire state of Texas. And so I get really excited when I'm able to mention that I do own this corporation, that I'm very lucky to be a part of this. But also, the goal here is to not just be the only autistic owned ABA company, but hopefully become one of many to be able to provide as much support to those individuals and hopefully inspire other autistic individuals to create their own ABA company as well. So, as we continue on this background, a little bit of the table of contents of what we're going to discuss today is that we'll discuss the growth of ABA. how its origins came about, as well as key milestones. Moving into masking on what is masking and why do autistic individuals do it. Then, being able to discuss controversial ABA, being able to discuss why people have a problem with it. It is no secret that there is a controversy with ABA currently in our field, and how we can then move past that. What can we do to rebuke some of these concerns that people have? Moving into more assent-based practices that can help mitigate this kind of harm, becoming more adaptable, becoming more supportive of the individuals that we are serving. Finally, giving you some lived experiences, other people other than myself that you can speak to, or read about or learn about to hear that kind of autistic voice. And then finally, understanding how we can foster this culture to respect both autonomy as well as grow as people as a whole. So as we continue on, right, we're going to learn about this growth of ABA. It started really in the 1960s. There was this rise of ABA. The man on the right, for anyone that may know him or may not know him, this is B.F. Skinner. This individual was one of the original founders of applied behavior analysis therapy, and more specifically started as more experimental analysis of factors of behavior. It began as research, beginning to apply principles of behavior, and then uh, understanding what we can do to better support these individuals on the spectrum. Unfortunately, in the 1960s, though, there was still this issue with understanding autism, understanding mental diagnosis, different disabilities. There was little funding. And it was hard to get this out into the world, get this into other people's hands to better understand it. And more specifically, there was really no outlet for publishing these findings. That's a problem. If we don't have a way of providing this kind of information to others, there's really no way of moving it forward. And so with his push, with other people's support, we were able to move toward more formal beginnings. And more specifically in 1968, the creation of both the Journal of Applied Behavior Analysis as well as the practice as a whole to understand how we can implement this, not just in a research clinical setting, but maybe in that more applied setting where we go into homes, communities, things like that as well. And all the while, it's important to understand that while ABA was being created in the 60s, more specifically 1968, there was a mental institution that was going about called Willowbrook, and I like to call it the last disgrace, if you were. There was an individual, a reporter named Gerardo Rivera, who said, "This is what it looked like, this is what it sounded like, but how can I tell you about the way it smelled? It smelled of filth, it smelled of disease, and it smelled of death." I mention this institution because it's very important to understand where the mental diagnoses at the time in the 30s, the 40s, the 50s was really being understood, and more specifically in 1947 when this New York State funded asylum had been created. Now, this is a big issue because our ratio here was 50 to 1. Typically, in applied behavior analysis, we now see that a really good gold standard of ratio is going to be 1 to 1. Now, imagine having 50 kids, 50 teens, adults, whatever it may be, with different kinds of diagnoses, different kinds of concerns here, and it being 50 of them to one person. Well, what happens here is that we get physical, sexual, and emotional abuse by these attendants. And by 1965, it was holding 6,000 residents when really it should have only been able to hold 4,000. So we have in 1972, this report came out with, in 1968, ABA was starting to be created with this wide spectacle of what Willowbrook was. There came a lot of individuals to say, well, what do we do? How do we stop this? How do we better support individuals that are needing this kind of care? At the time, again, we keep in mind that mental diagnoses were not spoken about as openly or as transparently as they are today. Despite what may be thought of the current generation, right, we have to admit that people are far more open talking about their diagnoses than they were in the 50s and the 60s, right? We have a lot of people that say, oh, I have autism now, I have anxiety, I have ADHD, I have depression. That was not the case. And more specifically, when I was growing up, even in the 90s. In the 90s, admittedly, I was very ashamed of my autism. It was more about fitting in than it was actually speaking on how to better promote ourselves as individuals, right? And in the 50s to 60s, and also again in the 70s, that was the problem here. This place, even though it was reported on in 1972, it wasn't closed until 1987. And that's a big issue. And we still have some concerns to this day. We have some areas in the northeastern part of the United States that do things such as electroshock therapy. These things that we may have omitted or left behind, or at least we think so, are still big problems here. And it's something that we try to work through. But as we continue forward from that 1972 report, we see in the 70s and the 80s, ABA is still growing. ABA is still having people understand what to do, how to support individuals on the spectrum, how to support other diagnoses as well. Research continues in the 70s and 80s. And the right here, we just see a brief overview of what is ABA. I like to include it, not just because it helps us understand what applied behavior analysis is, for those that may already know, but also there's a really cute penguin, and who doesn't like penguins? In the 90s, we have ABA was being accepted finally as an ABA, excuse me, as an evidence-based strategy. That meant that individuals we're able to use this kind of strategy, this kind of science to better support individuals on the spectrum as well. Now, in the 90s, it was not accepted by insurances yet. There were some insurance that were accepting it, some states that accepted this as an evidence-based practice, but there was still a lot of concerns. It's not going to be until the mid 2000s that we finally got every state to accept ABA as something that insurance should accept, that they should offer. And so there's a big concern. But by the 2000s, we get this nationally board of recognition for ABA therapy to support these individuals. At the time, again, before this, we could have behavior support specialists, behavior specialists, autism specialists that don't actually have some kind of certification behind their name that lets them be justified in what they're providing. And so by the 2000s, we finally get this national recognition, which is really significant. And in the 2010s and 2020s now, we see it everywhere. We see ABA in clinics and homes and community settings. In my personal clinic at Autism International Consulting, we go to the Houston Zoo, we go to restaurants, movie theaters. I always say to my audiences that you may be out on the street with, significant other or friends, and you may see me doing ABA therapy. And that's what it's about. It's about trying to get into a more naturalistic type setting, more generalized setting to better support these individuals to live a very long and healthy and independent life. But what we come about though is this idea of masking. Why does this occur? We see a prevalence of autism start to increase. From 1970, there were 1 in 10,000 individuals that were diagnosed with autism. As we continue forward all the way up to 2020 and 2023 by the CDC, we have that 1 in 36 children, adults, teens, whatever it may be, people were diagnosed with autism. The 317% increase since 2000. Now, if I was a betting man, I would say probably the next time that the CD lists out a prevalence, likely it's going to be even less, maybe 1 in 25, 1 in 28. I don't know. I'm not from the CDC, but I would imagine so based on this increasing trend. As behavior analysts, we do enjoy seeing an increasing trend and we can know where it goes on next. We have to ask ourselves, why did this occur? What happened? Did we all of a sudden go from having no one with autism, but then going into everyone having autism or a majority of people having autism? I would say likely not, right? What we do have are a lot of individuals that were better able to understand that diagnosis, able to understand what kind of characteristics were needed in order to be diagnosed here, right? I jokingly talk about those individuals that say, well, you don't look autistic. Well, I say, do I smell autistic? Do I hear autistic in this kind of way? And it's important to understand that individuals on the spectrum don't look a certain way. But what we do see is certain characteristics amongst them that do create this kind of prevalence to occur. And more specifically as well, we think about maybe an older generation that says, well, we didn't have autism back in my day. That's something new. That's a stereotype that I've heard before. And we have to think about maybe our grandparents that had to sit in the same chair every day, that ate the same lunch every day, that took the same route to work every day, that needed that. And if any kind of small change happened in their life, it was just the worst thing to happen in the world, right? That I do believe autism had always been prevalent. It's just a matter of us better understanding what that looks like. So, what masking is, for those that may not know, it's also called camouflaging, it's called compensation. And what we see here in both Pearson and Rose and Hull et al. Are both neuro-affirming, neuro-accepting individuals and groups of individuals that were able to provide research evidence that was able to better allow individuals on the spectrum to be heard. They were a part of this process to complete these research articles, as well as being able to better support the individual as a whole to understand what happens with masking and why it can be a negative, right? It can cause depression. It can cause anxiety. Again, I'm a very transparent person. I have both autism as well as anxiety. My medical doctor says that those go hand in hand. And if it was not for some anxiety medication, I probably would not be able to do this presentation either, right? But things that it may look like, right? It is not always going to be hand flapping is autism, and so that's how I know you have it, right? It could be copying accents or tones, trying to act normal. In a little bit, I'll show you a video of what that looks like. Developing some kind of script. A lot of the times before I do some kind of presentation or I have some kind of small talk, I have a set list of things that I'm going to say or talk about or do that I know really resonate with individuals. And so that's something that really helps me. But what happens here in this situation is that we start having a lot of stress, a lot of low self-esteem, maybe imposter syndrome, maybe not being able to really better understand the society that we're currently in, right? It's hiding or controlling these behaviors that are associated with autism. And that really, as we continue forward, is going to be a discussion of where that controversy comes from, right? As we continue forward in another graph here, as I'll show you later, is going to be more examples of that. But what I'd like to do right now is show you. Some of you may know this individual. Her name is Kaylin Partlow. She was on Love on the Spectrum, I believe, season one. And so she's also a registered behavior technician currently, who discusses what autism is from that masking perspective. And we can discuss that a little bit after I show the presentation. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to share my screen and show show that tab there. So then that way we can have a better understanding of what that may be. So if you just excuse me for 1 second while I find it, very good. I'm going to go ahead and share that. And then I'm going to share my audio with you all. But I hope for now everyone is finding this to be very helpful.
Taught you to do in disability etiquette training, I thought to myself as the autism expert turned to face my coworker while answering the question I asked. Maybe it's me, I wonder. Maybe my body language has led her to believe that I don't care about the answer. I do care. Stand up straighter, lean in ever so slightly, and look at nothing else besides her eyes. That'll show her I care. It didn't. Were they really interested in friendship, or did they only accept my invite because there wasn't anything better to do? I think to myself as I take a mental note of how long it's been since I was the one to be invited. Maybe it's me, I wonder. Maybe I'm not friendly enough at work. They might think I don't care, or worse, they might not think of me at all. I do care. Look at them. Smile. Ask about their day. That'll show them I care. It didn't. That doesn't help. It's either yes or no, she tells me. I don't know, I say again. Maybe it's me, I wonder. But surely she knows I've been caught off guard. Maybe she'll offer more information so I can make a decision, or a reason I should say yes. Wait quietly until she says something. That'll let her know I care what she thinks. It didn't. In the first two examples, I'm masking, which could be loosely defined as inhibiting behavior associated with autism, and instead engaging in social behavior that's expected with regard to context. Masking is effortful and tiring, and in my experience, it's not even effective in convincing people of what I'm trying to portray. In the last example, I'm not masking. I'm engaging in behavior that felt natural and made the most sense at that moment. If you recall, none of those things worked out how I'd hoped. Save this video as a reminder that there's no such thing as easy autism.
So again, I always find that really helpful to better understand. Let me go ahead and stop sharing my screen here. Oh yeah, Amy says that it was Kay. So awesome, very good. I'm glad you guys are familiar with her. Oh, excuse me 1 second. Sorry, y'all. Looks like it wanted me to show you more TikTok, but that is not why we are here. We can do that at home. So let me go ahead and share my screen once more here. So as we continue on with understanding what Kaylin is talking about, we understand that masking is something that unfortunately a lot of individuals on the spectrum are needing to do. I'll give an example for myself. If I was here hand flapping away and just not really speaking, maybe going back and forth but not talking to anybody or trying to be representative of what could be happening with the staff here, I may not be here. You may not be interested in what I'm having to say. And so instead, I'm having to mask. I'm having to be an individual that has to do XYZ kind of material here. I may be fidgeting with my ring to better support me with my fidgets. I may do that off camera. I may do that on camera. I've been more comfortable now with on camera before, right? But it is not going to be exactly what I am typically when I'm off camera, right? And so some things about camouflaging and simulation, right? As we continue forward, it can drain energy. It can feel out of place. It can be just an opportunity to connect, right? There's a lot of the times where a individual on the spectrum may not understand how to connect with other people, how to connect on a social level, and that in of itself is a big problem. I have a friend who is a current teacher, but at the time she was a salesman. Now she is on the spectrum herself. And what would happen is that she was a manager of the sales team and she would be absolutely wonderful at her job. But eventually she lost her job. She was let go. And the reason that they had given was because she was not a team player. And what that meant for her was that they usually would do a happy hour outside of work and she would not participate because she was exhausted. It is mentally draining, mentally exhausting to try to interact on a daily basis with individuals at the workforce, and then to expect her to do it outside of the work can be very difficult. It can be very difficult for her to continue that because, like everything else in our body, masking is a muscle. It's something that has to be learned, it has to be grown, it has to be practiced and stretched until we're able to do it for a long amount of time, which is why we may see little kids, teens, adults in that way that have never done it before do well for maybe an hour or maybe 30 minutes, but really kind of tumble and fall after that hour has gone because they haven't practiced it enough. And so this kind of presentation here, this graph, just allows us to better understand that. And Amy, I'll be sure to send these slides over to you so you can share it. But if anyone would like to screenshot, you're more than welcome to as well. But there's a breakdown in categories here. We have, again, compensation, masking, and assimilation. What I'd like to have a better understanding of here is that compensation goes first. That is the first thing that individuals would do, but it quickly goes downhill from masking to assimilation, whereas assimilation is basically losing who we are as people. We are no longer who we are individually. And instead, in order to survive in the world that we are currently in, we are having to pretend to be somebody we are completely not. And that's a big problem, right? And that's where a lot of these controversies come from. Where I do have another friend, for instance, who would say, when we were in a group together with autistic individuals, she said, well, a lot of people should just accept that the people in this group are going to say what they want and what they're thinking because we're just autistic and that can't be helped. Now, it really depends, in my opinion, anecdotally from the region that a person's at. From a Californian perspective, I believe that that was just her mindset of where she grew up, that people were far more accepting. But from a Texas perspective, a lot of the times what happens here is that that doesn't work. You have to be able to assimilate, get along, or be able to connect with the individuals and kind of accept the way that people are wanting you to be looked at in order to do well in both society as well as in a career-oriented manner. And again, as much as that we wish that the world would change for our individuals on the spectrum, and I believe that it is headed that way, what we do see though is that we're not quite there yet. And at the time, individuals on the spectrum are still needing to change who they may be a little bit in order to better connect and do well in a job place setting as well. So I think that's going to be something to be really significant here. But this leads to controversy, right? As we learned about the history of ABA, it was growing in a very controversial time with places like Willowbrook. We see that from the 80s, the 90s, and maybe even the early 2000s, there was a lot of controversy in ABA because it wasn't neurodiverse accepting, it wasn't trauma informed or assent based, at least not the majority here, right? We were learning how to manage individuals on the spectrum and allow them to learn certain skills, providing their wants and needs effectively. But a lot of the times it was sitting at a table and doing a copious amount of work. It was not naturalistic. It was more my way or no way kind of situation. And that's a big problem. On the right here, we're going to see different kinds of red flags of what autism therapy may be. And I know also in that same situation, there have been some concerns with private equity backed ABA, right? Not to say that there's anything necessarily wrong with that, but what we do see in some instances is that in some private equity backed organizations, we may have individuals that have no understanding of what ABA really is or what individuals on the spectrum really are needing, but instead we may see a get rich quick kind of scheme, a way to make a lot of money in a short amount of time. I think it's no secret here that there is a lot of money in insurance when we build that kind of thing. And so we have a lot of individuals that think that they can just be a part of this. But in actuality, what happens is that that patient is going to be harmed. That patient's whole perspective of themselves may be harmed. And as we continue forward, we understand that there may be this lack of individualization. Too often, when there are just too many kind of companies or clinics or just a large group of kids under one BCBA, we may start seeing more cookie cutter type of behavior plans because it's faster and it helps that individual complete their kind of work that they need to get done. This overemphasis on this compliance, this my way or no way kind of situation, rather than focusing on this self-advocacy or choice making kind of way, it takes that back seat. There's insufficient training. We're just kind of wrapping out different kinds of RBTs or BCBAs, trying to get them out the door in order to help quote unquote help these individuals in providing this kind of therapy. But what happens in this situation is that now these individuals are just leaving. If they find something better or easier or safer, BCBAs, RBTs, they'll just leave a business. And there's this constant turnover that causes problems. Is that now there's lack of credentialing for individual staff members. These kids are left without a BCBA or left without an RBT to better care for them. And they kind of just suck, right? And more specifically, there's this unrealistic promise and a lack of fade out. A lot of the times, again, if there's a lot of money, it makes the most business sense to just say, I'm going to keep this kid for the rest of their life until I'm able to really just get as much money as possible. And that's just an awful way to think of it. But from that business perspective, that's where it comes into play here, right? But what we have to understand is that the goal should never be to keep these kids for longer than 6 months, a year, maybe 2 years. Get them back with their neurotypical peers. Get them into a way to be able to make friends, being able to go into the community, be able to become more independent. And having these full-time patients are fine, absolutely, right? But there has to be a way to work with the parents and work with the kids specifically, getting the buy-in of the parents and also getting the buy-in of the kids that we're working with to get them to understand that, hey, we need you to be independent. We need to get you to a certain place. But a lot of the times, this wasn't happening, right? And more specifically, I like to bring up attention for in the 7 autism therapies red flags, that the issue of parents not being allowed to observe sessions. In my opinion, anecdotally, again, that is a huge red flag. If we're not allowing parents to participate in the therapy, if we're not allowing them to have weekly parent meetings or being able to have conversations with their BCBA or RBT or whatever it may be, what is the point of the therapy? A lot of the times, and we'll get into social media in just a bit, but sometimes I'm on social media and I'll see somebody asking for a recommendation of an ABA company. And on the ABA company recommendation list, somebody will say, oh, well, try so and so place. My child's been there for 10, 12 years and they've just done so well. And that concerns me because a child shouldn't be in ABA for 10 years. That's not what this therapy is supposed to be. It's supposed to be a way to provide these prerequisite skills that they need to be successful. And then once they're able to receive this, then we move into getting them back into the school system and being able to do things such as that. But because of individuals that are doing, I would say, incorrect forms of ABA, right? They may think that that they may be doing things appropriately. The fact of the matter is that they're not, and it can be seen through social media. I think a lot of the times people get concerned about why all of a sudden are there's so many people talking about the controversies of ABA. Where was this in the 80s and the 70s and whatever it may be? Uh, and what we have to remember is that social media was rising at the same time as these individuals on the spectrum were having this original form of ABA, and now they have a voice. And a lot of the times in our perspective here is that whoever has the most shocking story on social media gets the most attention. And so it's very significant to have that kind of belief in order to get the most likes, the most views, the most clicks in this kind of way. So before I continue on, I want to stress here, each one of the individuals here, as well as others, their stories have to be honored and respected. It is their story. It may be anecdotal, but it is their story. And this is how they felt about ABA, as well as any kind of trauma that they may have faced at that time, right? And I also like to preface here with those individuals that maybe saying that all ABA is awful. I bring this kind of analogy here, right? Let's say we go to a medical doctor and that medical doctor said things or did things that we did not necessarily agree with. Would we then tell ourselves, I'm going to be turned off from Western medicine the rest of my life? I am never going to be a part of Western medicine again. Probably not. We would then move into, I'm going to go ahead and find a medical doctor that fits my ideals and beliefs to better support these individuals here, right? So what I have here are 3 different pictures from 3 different forms of social media. We have Threads, which is an Instagram kind of Twitter kind of material. We have Instagram on the top, we have Twitter on the top left, and then we have a Facebook post in the middle right side of the screen here. And it's important to read these and understand that somebody named the autistic coach says ABA is abuse. It doesn't exist to help actually autistic people. It exists to erase us, to control us, to alter us, all to make life easier for neurotypical people. It destroys one sense of self. It leads to post-traumatic stress disorder and at least half of those who are subjective to it. And The concern here as practitioners have to be understood that I didn't post it here, but about 4,000, 5,000 people either retweeted this or liked it in that kind of situation. That's a lot of people that now think that ABA is abuse, or at very least believe that ABA is abuse, right? And that's a concern. But again, he's within his right. The neurodivergent rebel, people may be familiar with, say that ABA cannot be neurodiverse affirming. This is a lie. ABAs are using to trick people. Don't fall for it. There's nothing affirming about ABA. I understand that this presentation is supposed to be about how to promote neuro-affirming approaches, right? But I think it's significant to not shy away from this kind of concern, this kind of influence that is found in social media because it's impacting a lot of individuals and maybe more specifically, parents and others who are going to each one of you to receive their kind of help and support, right? But what is significant here, and an argument that I use in this kind of situation is, again, if we focus on shock value here, what we see is simply a story. We have no solutions. What I would imagine occurs next, but what they never show you afterwards, is that parent, this concerned parent, that concerned professional that says, "Oh my gosh, I didn't even think about it this way. You were so right. Please tell me another solution. Please tell me another way to help my child." And more often than not, crickets. We have no help. We have no solutions. We have no alternatives. A lot of the times, individuals will post again to try and provide that kind of support in their ways, that support. But there's no other way of helping the parent. There's no other way of helping these individuals on the spectrum and saying, oh, hey, like this doesn't work, but you can try this. Because really, there isn't. There isn't another way of really better promoting. There's different therapies, sure, speech therapy, occupational therapy. But this is also one of these kind of therapies that is evidence-based. That there is a plethora of now journal articles that are promoting what we're doing here. That's why some journal articles may call this a gold standard, right? And something significant. But it's important to stay open. I bring this up not to discredit any of these individuals, as I stressed earlier. I bring this up to understand, for individuals to understand that these people do exist. And it's up to us as practitioners to not shy away from these individuals and say, hey, I hear you. I value your opinion. I don't agree with it, but maybe we can come up with some kind of middle ground. Maybe we can come up with some kind of compromise here where we can better understand each of our point of views. I was on a podcast at one point, and everyone's more than welcome to look this up, with Autism Speaks. Autism Speaks has its own controversies, of course, right? But again, I try not to shy away from these things. And I speak to these individuals and they say, "So, what got you into torture?" I mean, ABA. And of course that was a joke, right? But of course that also comes from somewhere that is a bit more negative. And I had to have that discussion with this individual, and by the end of it, hopefully he changed his mind a little bit to understand that a more naturalistic, a more generalized way of promoting this kind of support to these individuals on the spectrum can be good. It just really depends on the individuals. Are there going to be bad ABA practitioners? Absolutely. Just like there are bad medical practitioners, bad therapists, bad teachers in these kind of situations, right? But there's also good. So to say that all ABA is abuse, all ABA is not neurodiverse affirming, I think is stretching it just a bit and can be a bigger concern here, right? ABA violating principles of justice and non-malfeasance. I think these are also concerns here, right? These are justifiable because there's now, you see a collective on Facebook that is talking about this, but by no means do they speak for everybody. So it's important for us as practitioners to really present ourselves in a way that better promotes that. So we all came here for the strategies, though. This is all great, being able to understand this controversy, being able to understand masking. But what can we do to better support these individuals? Where it's important to understand the difference between assent and dissent, right? Assent is simply saying, we're going to play Candyland. And the child then says, no, I'd rather play Chutes and Ladders. And you say, okay, let's play Chutes and Ladders. That's totally fine. Allowing the child to go left when the parent wants to go right. If a parent says, hey, let's go to the right, and the parent's like, I want to go that way at the zoo. And you're like, okay, well, it's no problem to me. I don't care which way. Let's go ahead and go to the left. They're allowing themselves to be self-advocates. They're being understood. They're being heard. And that's significant here, right? But what I find significant as well in our field is better understanding that sometimes I feel like we take it too far. That there are some individuals that say, well, here's your lunch. And the child says, well, I don't want to eat that. I want candy. And then we say, oh, well, the child said he wants candy for lunch. So here you go. That's a problem, right? We have to do assent-based practices to a certain limit. where we start focusing on the nutrition of the individual, where we start focusing on realistic expectations. If a child says, I don't want to go to school today, take me to the mall, take me to Disney World, are we then going to say, okay, well, let's go to Disney World because you told me what you wanted? That's really great. I highly doubt that, right? It's about understanding limits and then moving forward to a sense of control, allowing the child to be able to pick basic understanding or basic choices, but not necessarily wide-reaching choices, right? And that's where the dissent comes from, where we do start saying things like, nope, this is my way or no way, deal with it. That's a problem too, where we have to understand that it is a give and take, much like with any other adult. If we had friends and we were like, hey, we're going to go here, and our friend was like, oh, I really don't want to go there for dinner today. We're like, oh, tough luck. We're still going to go. That'd be a problem too. It's looking at our patients as people. I know that's really crazy to think about, of course, sarcastically, but it's important to understand because if we don't promote some level of assent, we lead to frustration, anger, aggression, trauma. All of these things are going to be big issues. And then we get just more and more social media posts about how traumatic my ABA therapy was growing up. And for those that may be wondering, I personally did not participate in ABA. We couldn't afford ABA growing up in the 90s. But what I do promote at Autism International Consulting is that naturalistic, that trauma-informed, that assent-based care. And more specifically, some interventions here, I'll provide these kind of research articles for you to more than welcome look up later. But choice making. It's as simple as, do you want the red pill or the blue pill? Do you want to go left or right? And you can make it in a way that can be really significant to you in the way that you're promoting things, right? So, do you want to write with a pen or a pencil? It doesn't matter to me how they write, but they are going to write. It just matters to them to get that buy-in for pen or pencil. Do you want to write about option A or option B? Again, I don't care what they write about. I just care that they write. And so being able to allow them to pick their prompts really helps. And then the next question I usually get in this kind of situation are individuals that are concerned about, okay, well, what if there's something that they just like can't stop, right? So they're playing Switch and they don't, and we say, oh, it's my turn. Like that can be a big problem. And we get into that later with Greg Henley's My Way. But it can be, hey, we have to be done with the Switch. Do you want to be done in 3 minutes or 5 minutes? And that helps them have that ability to better understand that kind of takeaway. Or in a situation as well, if it's just simply a dish, and I say this a lot of times to my parents in a more exaggerated manner, but hey, do you want to put your dish in the sink or do you want to go mow the lawn? Probably they want to go put their dish in the sink because that's far easier than mowing the lawn. Unless you do have a kid that just really loves grass and likes cutting the lawn, please don't ever pick that as a choice. They would, of course, pick that. From assent-based interventions, there are several different types. So I have a good friend, Dr. Bondi here, who focused on PECs and AAC usage. This promoted functional communication training. It allowed these individuals to finally be able to have a voice where they didn't have it otherwise, right? Being able to have real long sentences. If you have not taken that level training, I highly advise you to because it's absolutely incredible. I was able to take part in that last week, and it's just a wonderful experience, right? Emotional regulation training is another one where we get into maybe the zones of regulation, being able to provide this kind of want and need in a more realistic manner, being able to identify when I'm mad, I'm sad, I'm happy, I'm surprised, all of these things, or self-monitoring checklists as well with these individuals that aren't able to promote that or provide that, right? So we're not going to do maybe self-monitoring checklists with our non-speaking, non-verbal kiddos, whatever you want to call it in this kind of situation, but maybe with our individuals that understand why they're in ABA. And a lot of the times too, that's just the very transparent aspect of it. Be like, look, I know you have a problem. You know you have a problem. Let's work together to try and resolve this. The self-monitoring checklist and behavior contracts, I know it says contacts, I meant contracts, excuse the typo, is getting that buy-in that is needed to promote growth. If we have buy-in with our kids, if we have buy-ins with our teens and adults, we are going to see so much more progress through those assent-based practices than if we said, hey, sorry, it's going to be my way. Speaking of my way, we have Hanley's, and I tried to find the article that recommended this. Now, I believe it's still in review based on what Greg Hanley, I know he's a good friend of Rasmus, is the PFA and SBT approach here, where we are promoting that child's ability to tell us no and accept that. I think growing up for myself, specifically anecdotally, as well as maybe many other individuals that were on the spectrum, having one of our patients tell us no was just absolutely cannot do. But as this field has grown, we have started to see more and more progress in that way. And it's important to allow these individuals to understand how to use functional language, how to promote that in a way that is acceptable and more socially oriented to, excuse me, to then better support their ability to be independent, their ability to make friends, to have a job, to keep the job, to understand that inside thoughts versus outside thoughts is a very important skill to have as well. These lived experiences are going to be important. Not just for myself, not just from Kaylin last year. I do appreciate you guys did that, but just all over. Honestly, it was not until very recently, I would say a couple of years, maybe 10 years ago, that autistic voices were finally being able to join this conversation, that they were able to be talked with rather than talked at, where a lot of steering committees now, or boards, or different kinds of groups, presenters had autism. That was a lot of the times, and maybe we see it more and more in my experience, Texaba, where we see at conferences, it's a lot of researchers that don't have autism themselves, but they were talking about autistic individuals. And I can tell you right now that as this field has grown, we see more and more individuals on the spectrum starting to be a part of this. Maybe someone in the audience is both a BCBA and diagnosed autistic. I think that's absolutely incredible. My company, Autism International Consulting, has hired BCBAs, RBTs, BCABAs that are all autistic because that voice needs to be heard. They need to be supported in that way. I think one of the biggest compliments I can get from the patients here is for them to say, I may be 10 right now, but I'll see you in 8 years, Armando. I want you to hire me as an RBT. I want you to be able to give me a job here. I think that's wonderful. And if we can do that with all of our kids, I think that's fantastic. We have to use this ability to shift from hiding things, not bringing the child into the conversation, to a level of transparency, self-advocacy, and more specifically autonomy, to give them this buy-in to be those kind of individuals that matter, right? To understand why they're being here. If we can face controversies head on, we can really change that mindset. And this quote here is just nothing about us without us. It's important to have them be a part of this. If we can really encapsulate the individual into their programming, into their behavior support plan, into understanding why they're doing certain things, we can see a big change. We have some patients here even that are able to speak to us, provide their wants and needs, and they will tell us sometimes, like, look, I tell my mom when I'm angry that I hate her. I don't actually hate her. I just don't know how to present it to her. I don't know how to present my frustration to her. And through a lot of support, a lot of buy-in in that way, we get to see those kind of changes as well. So these are just a few examples of individuals and resources that we can use, right? So I actually am a part of this book. I'm not trying to plug it by any means, but I do think it's a really good resource. Adulting on the Spectrum by a good friend of mine, Ron Sandison. He is another public speaker here. And he's also the individual in This is Autism book, the second one from the left, if you will. And so what these two books, This is Autism as well as Adulting on the Spectrum, they both mention individuals on the spectrum as well as their life and how they're going through different kinds of characteristics here, how they're going through challenges, concerns. I believe my portion of Adulting on the Spectrum was dating on the spectrum. I'm now married with a wonderful wife with a child on the way, about 3 weeks to go. I'm going to have a baby girl, right? And so it's scary. It's different. It's new. It's something that I am not used to and I'm struggling with because I am so comfortable when I have already done something before that whenever I do something that is new, that I flounder. I have no idea how to manage that. And so it is something that is difficult for me as an autistic individual. But for those others that we may know on the spectrum, books like This is Autism and Adulting on the Spectrum may be really good. I will plug this, my company, Autism International Consulting. We do provide consultation to other companies, to individuals on the spectrum, to parents, professionals in other countries. Shout out to the Dubai individual, being able to support these individuals that may not have resources otherwise. We want to make sure that the resources are not hidden, that they are available, that we are not gatekeeping to really better support these people. As well as two individuals here. We have Michelle Vinokurov and Jeffrey Snyder. These are two individuals that I absolutely adore. They are both public speakers. Michelle is a assistant behavior analyst. Both of them are autistic. Both of them are able to provide that kind of knowledge that we need from individuals on the spectrum here. And so I do recommend talking to other autistic individuals, being able to get their opinion, their attention on details of how to live on this, as well as their own kind of experiences. Because again, there's nothing without us when it's about us, right? If we can further that along and promoting more individuals on the spectrum to speak on their kind of experiences, we can see a really great deal of improvement, and not just only our field, but just as a whole, as a society, right? I do typically say about ABA is that as soon as we stop growing and we start to plateau, then our field, any science in general, is no longer a science. We have to continue to learn and learn from each other as well as other individuals, and more specifically in this science, from those on the spectrum, to really be able to develop our field even further. So finally, what does this all mean for you? How can we focus on the child in front of you? Amy may be familiar with this because this is currently the slogan for Hi Rasmus, and I absolutely love it. We focus on that child in front of us by listening to those in need, by hearing any kind of decisions that are being made and deciding if that request is reasonable, right? Again, we're not talking about you want to go to the left, that's too bad, so sad, we're going to go to the right. We're talking about us being able to say, hey, I hear you, I value what you say, and we're going to do this. I'll give an example from a patient I currently have. He's a 12-year-old kid, diagnosed on the spectrum, very functional, right? But has some social issues. But what we had the other day on Monday was that this individual was getting upset. Now, his schedule for the day went every 15 minutes, he was in a different room, right? And I do this in order to promote excitement, be able to promote transitioning, generalization, as well as being able to promote the ability to transition very quickly when needed. But this individual was getting upset. And he was like, I don't understand why I need to change from room to room so often. And I said, hey, I hear you. Why don't I make it from 15 minutes to 20 minutes and we can see how it goes? And he was like, yeah, no, I like that. I'm like, okay, great. Let's do 20 minutes. Let's reevaluate when we get back to it and see what you think of it, and being able to promote in that way. And he loved that. And ever since then, we've been fine. At least, I mean, again, it was Monday. We have a few days to go. We'll see how it goes, right? But in this meantime, I let him pick those choices and move forward from there. Some piece of advice as well is to believe that your child can be independent. I see this a lot of the times, unfortunately, with my littles. I have a lot of parents, professionals that may say, we can do it. We can fight this autism. That's not going to impact this child whatsoever, right? But unfortunately, because we work with all ages from 2 to 90 years old, because after 90, they just don't want to learn it anymore. But in that teenage, tween, adult kind of perspective, I speak with parents and be like, hey, we're going to work on this and this and this. And the parent turns from going from, hey, we can fight it, we can do it, to, I mean, you can try, best of luck. We've done it forever, but it doesn't work. That's a concern. We have to keep in mind and remember that our children are able to accomplish many great things so long as the family, the guardian, the professional believe in them. If they have that big support system, they're able to accomplish many great things. And I firmly believe that if it was not for my my mother, my father, my sister, and if they gave up on me, I would not be where I am today. And I'd like to leave you with one last piece of advice here before we move forward, is asking yourself every day this question: did I do a good job for my patient, or did I do a good job for my company? And if you did a good job for your company, that's a concern, because that is not why we became behavior analysts. We became behavior analysts, we became assistant behavior analysts, RBTs, whatever we may be in this field, to help the patient, being able to help the child, the teenager, the adult. If we can support them and believe in them, then we can get to a point that we can let them go, that we can fade out our progress, that we can fade out what we are needing to do for them, because we know that they're going to do and be very successful in life as well. So a perspective of today's ABA, as we continue, as we leave off in just a little bit, because I wanted to make sure I left some time for questions, is to understand that there are 4 different ways that we can learn. We can learn by creating joy, making it naturalistic, making it happy, inspiring, loving, being able to empower, focusing on that self-advocacy that we were just discussing, learning by listening, being able to hear the concerns of our patients and be able to say, hey, I hear you, I value you. Let's change things. Let's do this together, because you're here because you want to be. And if we can have the patient want to be here, I guarantee that your day is going to go a lot faster. Finally, learn by teaching. There are some things that your child's not going to know, and they are going to need that help. But if we can talk to them about it and let them understand why they're learning these things, it's going to be significant. These are just some of our core values at Autism International Consulting, that we focus on self-advocacy. We focus on transparency, being very open with both our parents as well as our patients, being able to provide those wants and needs, focusing on independence and understanding that you can grow. You can have this growth in everything that you do, so long as we have that support system and we maintain it. This is a quote that I've just come up with, and I thought it would be really inspiring for many people, is that one of the biggest misconceptions here about autism is that it looks a certain way. But in reality, autism is a spectrum of hopes, dreams, and a desire to be ourselves. If if we can really focus on this belief that these all these individuals want to be is independent. All these individuals want to be is themselves, make friends, have a career, get married, go to college, get a job. If we can help support that, then I would say we've done our job. So, as I mentioned, I want to leave this up and just say very much thank you to each one of you for paying attention today. I've left my email, my website, as well as my phone number. The QR code does go to our website. And I'm also going to put here on the right side, and I'll put it in the chat as well, so you can copy and paste if you'd like. But at Autism INTL will take you to our Instagram, and we would love for you to follow. We post a lot of times the pictures, the events we do, different kinds of tips and tricks for families. You get to meet our therapists, our colleagues as well, and really just cheer on every patient that we have. So I truly do thank you for your time today.
Well, thank you so much, Armando. I just can't thank you enough for those valuable insights and that presentation. I truly, I will say, I like that you really leaned into the controversies. I've had a lot of people answer them, kind of vaguely, but I don't think sit in them as much. And I think it's so important as practitioners for us to really understand everyone's perspective and we need to understand the whys to get to the hows, and so that we can focus on the child in front of us. So thank you so much. I'm going to open it up for questions. I do see one question in the chat from April. Armando, if you want to answer that. Do you see that?
Yeah. It says, is the Valentino and Schillingsburg reference a peer-reviewed article or a conference presentation? It should be a peer-reviewed article. So if you look that up, you should be able to receive that as well. And again, Amy, I'm going to send you this presentation at a later time, and then that way you can share it if anyone's interested, of course. And for the audience here, I really, again, appreciate everyone sticking with me. I'm a pretty transparent guy. You can ask me anything you want. What was it like growing up with autism? How is it at Autism International Consulting? How is it having autism? Spoiler, it's fine. Um, and being able to really help you guys. I mean, this is y'all's time. I really want to be open with y'all. Again, it's an honor to be here today. Thank you so much.
Awesome. Well, I can see the chat, but I kind of when I shared my screen, I lost my Q&A box. So I don't know if y'all see anything in there.
Nothing in the Q&A, and that's totally okay. People are, a little shy. Everyone should have my number. And again, I'll be in the presentation, my email. Anyone's more than welcome. Please follow us on Instagram. We would love to hear from you. Say hi. I love meeting people in the field. It's great. I travel a lot throughout the nation. I have another conference in Kansas with the Department of Education. So it's a big deal for us at Autism International Consulting to try and promote as much as we possibly can for each one of you. So again, truly thank you.
Awesome. Well, if you want to learn more or check out our website or book a demo to see how our platform can help you, you can also connect with us on social media to stay up to date with our latest webinars and free resources. I hope everyone has a great day. Thank you for joining us to learn and grow together. Thank you all.
Take care, y'all. Bye bye.
Bye.